From Immersive Labs, this is Cyberhumanity.
Hello again all, I'm your host Chris Pace, joined once again by the Cyber Sausage, Max Vetter.
Hello.
Avenging researcher, Kev Breen.
Hi.
And finally, Paul, I probably can't talk about that, Bentham.
Hello.
In these podcasts, we try to look at cybersecurity from a human point of view, social engineering, hacker motivation, cyber crises, and more. These podcasts essentially come in two flavours. Either we're ranting about themes close to the hearts of security types, or we're chatting about threat and security stuff from recent weeks. And this episode is one of those. So we're going to begin with a story that I think, well, Max and I think has everything.
It's amazing.
It's got a villain, it's got intrigue, it's got cops, it's got techie stuff.
Got cyber, it's
the cybers.
Anonymity.
It's covered in the cybers. It's all in there.
0 days.
There's a 0 day in it. It's a thriller from start to It's an absolute page turner. And if you get the chance to read the Vice article about it, you definitely should. And this is Facebook helping law enforcement in the US, I think the FBI, to track down a what they described as a prolific child predator. Or we could subtitle this, Facebook hire hackers to exploit tails. And that essentially is exactly what happened. So there's some things that I need to understand. And the first thing I need to really understand, Max, is what is Tails and why does somebody who is a prolific predator, why are they using Tails?
Yeah, so Tails is a bit of software that was created by the Tor project. And so Tor, if you don't know, it's a anonymity software that uses multiple proxy servers to bounce people around. Developed for human rights people initially, but used by everyone from government, human rights, and bad guys as well. And Tails, it basically takes that to the next level where it's a whole operating system. And Tails is set, the settings in Tails means you have to put it on a USB stick or an SD card. I've got my copy on a micro SD card. So the micro SD card will fit in anything, and then you plug it in and it runs directly from that SD card. Therefore, it leaves nothing on the computer, and it also runs all the communications through Tor. So even if you're on some network somewhere, all you'll see is some encrypted Tor traffic. You won't. No imprint will be left on that computer for digital evidence capture or anything. So it basically takes anonymity and that privacy stuff to the next level. And again, it's developed by an open source project, but obviously used by bad guys, in this case a paedophile as well.
And the idea is that he is completely anonymous behind this operating system. He's invisible, basically.
Tor has kind of been known. Tor is how the well-known dark web runs through the Tor network, and this is used by lots of people. And Tails itself is the kind of gold standard of that. And because of the way it's developed, it's amazing that they've managed to catch him for a start. And this is what, from my perspective, both as an ex-police officer and someone who's worked in the dark web and understands this stuff, I'm really interested to see how they've done it, because it's quite clever however they managed it.
They're never going to tell us how they did it.
They're not giving anything away.
No, they won't, because that, and even if we work out. So we'll get into it about the 0 day, but yeah, it's a pretty interesting story, because obviously the other side of it is they've taken a very dangerous person, and hopefully he's going to get a very long time in jail for this and protect those youngsters that he was attacking.
That is the context for this, is that Facebook have decided to become involved in this case in particular because they identified this user of their platform as basically the nastiest user of their platform that there was. And so they took quite personally the idea of being able to remove him from the platform, and also, of course, ensure that he was brought to face justice. And the way this is played out is that essentially Facebook decided not to. The most obvious thing you might think would be to open a backdoor in their own platform that might give them access to be able to see where he was connecting from, or other things on the operating system that he was connecting from, or whatever, because he would obviously have to run, the Facebook web application in order to be able to use Facebook. But instead, what they did is they identified that he was obviously downloading videos, and so could see that he was using the video player within Tails. And so they effectively sent him a video that was an exploit, and when he opened that file, it revealed his true IP. I think that's broadly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. His MO was say to these underage girls, I'm not sure, boys as well, that he had nude pictures of them, and then over years would basically terrorize them, sending them things saying he would kill them, saying he'd come to his school, and get more sexually explicit things from them. And this, how he got caught, was the FBI sent him essentially a payload, a video that had something in it which would exploit the 0 day within Tails to find his real IP address. And for me, that's the kind of the technical interesting bit.
I do think it's worth remembering that Facebook and other providers do work with law enforcement in a standard way. So if they get certainly in UK law, and I'm sure it's the same in US law, if they get a warrant from an authority, from a judge signed, then they will disclose information related to bad actors on their platform. That's part of the whole license to operate within the US or UK jurisdiction. I think Facebook in this particular instance, of course, giving away the IP address of the person who's connecting wasn't relevant because they were anonymized behind the Tor network. And I think it's important to remember Facebook had been on this guy. There was a specific dedicated team in Facebook for one person. That's how bad he was. That had been tracking him for I think it's years, and he had been taunting them as well. So before it even gets to this like really interesting, almost surgical strike against this guy, very, very specific, they must have been racking their brains for years over how to capture him and stop what he was doing.
The interesting thing there is Facebook had the opportunity to put something into their own platform that they could have built their own exploit in their own platform targeting that one specific person, but instead they chose to go externally to buy in an exploit in a third-party application rather than building it into their own. And I suppose an interesting part there is if they'd approved it in their own platform, there's no going back from that. If you can do it once on Facebook, then the FBI can turn around and say, well, you did it before, you can do it again.
I have another slightly additional angle to this that I was thinking about here as well. If I'm Facebook and I want to stop this guy, that's my stated, this guy is taking advantage of underage children on my platform. Why don't I just block all Tor exit nodes from connecting to my platform?
There's so many people who use journalists in foreign countries, in Iran, they use Tails, they use Tor to protect their privacy so that they can get the news out of those countries. If you look at places like China's great firewall, blocking all those bits and pieces. So Tails, for them, it's their lifeline. That's how they operate.
And I've stopped using my Facebook account. It's that annoying. These people actually think it's a lifeline. Find something else.
I think they from reading it, and again we will get into the ethical, moral sides of buying an exploit and doing it for the FBI, but they seem to have done a balanced view of. They clearly didn't want to do it in their own platform because, as you said, the FBI could just come calling every day and go, "Oh, well, we've got this other person. It could be from anything not as serious as this. Can you hack them?" But then I think they balanced. They just want to target this guy, and they made that quite explicit. And I think there is a balance. Privacy advocates may be up in arms about them hacking Tails, but it's definitely they were only targeting this guy. And that's the interesting part about it is they got him.
That's the tactical answer. There is a broader moral conversation to be had about So last week, for example, we talked in quite a lot of depth about the Dark Basin group and Hacker for Hire and all that kind of stuff. We talked about all that stuff. And now this week we're saying, Facebook hired a hacker to build them a zero-day, and that's fine. So money exchanging hands for the exploit for whatever reasons, for the exploitation of a bit of software to open a vulnerability in it, is what they've done. So the question we have to ask is, what makes that okay, and which governments are allowed to do it and which ones aren't.
We don't know what they mean by hacker. We don't know whether they went to the dark web and hired a hacker, or whether they came to somebody who does exploit development, like somebody from the Zero Day Project, who does this for a blue team data living. We don't know who it was. We don't know what they did. So it might not be as dark seeded as that.
It's interesting. The reason they passed it to the FBI is right. They do not have the legal authority to hack their users, because Facebook aren't allowed to do that. But the reason they gave it to the FBI is FBI do. If they get a warrant, it's signed by a judge. That is democracy. If you do something bad, we will impinge on your human rights a bit under a warrant, because that is we're allowed to do that. And I think that's what they've done here.
There was a bit in the article that I didn't realise was a thing. And Senator Ron Wyden, in a statement, says, did it submit the zero day for review by the Interagency Vulnerabilities Equity Process, which is a process by which they should review this and determine whether details of this should be made public or not. So there is oversight available for these kinds of things, and it seems that maybe that wasn't followed in this place, or maybe they did follow that process and it was deemed something they didn't have to release.
And of course, this is the absolute fundamentals of all this. Do I keep it or release it for patching? That's a fundamental thing. Look at the FBI. They could have kept that. And how many other people are using Tails with that video download? They've burnt that equity for one, obviously, very prolific criminal.
What they did find, so the reason Facebook kind of moved up the timing of it was that they saw the patch that was coming out had patched the code, and so that's the reason and so that kind of made it even more targeted in the way that if you use it this time, you'll get him. If you use it after that, you're not.
How did Tails find it?
They didn't. They naturally patched out the exploit. So just a normal update.
Just a normal patch. Yeah.
Broke what it was.
And what is the process for Tails updating? Does it do that automatically? Is it an internet connected thing, or do you have to download a new version of the OS every time? That's
the interesting thing, because it sits on a USB outside the company, outside the computer. Sorry, I'm excited. Because it sits outside that. Updating, most people won't update it for a long time. So yeah, a lot of versions of Tails.
This is a caveat they used in the article. The FBI and Facebook both said, "Oh, it's okay. This isn't a zero day anymore now because we know it's been patched, so it's all fine." But you're saying basically the reality is that most people who use it are not going to update it for some period of time. So actually, many people would still remain vulnerable to this particular kind of attack. I've just called it an attack. This particular exploit.
It is an attack, whether it's a negative, bad attack or a good attack. I mean, Tails is actually very difficult to install. You need two different. You can only install it from another USB key, so you need two plugged in to install it onto the other one. So that is fairly laborious. So I would suggest people aren't doing that often either.
I don't think I think this is a grey area, clearly. So I don't think that any of us have opinions about this that are polarized, black or white. But it'd be interesting to just go around the table here and understand how this instinctively makes us feel. I'll go first. It makes me a little disconcerted that this kind of thing could happen potentially in the wrong context. There is no argument that what happened here probably needed to happen. I'm just not sure about how I feel about that approach being taken more broadly, for example. Kev, what do you think?
Obviously, absolutely the right reasons for doing it. And I think if they come out and release all the details of the exploit, exactly how it worked, exactly what the exploit was, how to patch it, formal patches, if they come out with that, then I'm all for this kind of thing. with the requirement that the FBI gets the proper legal validations in order to Facebook have been tracking this guy for years. They know exactly who they're targeting. If they'd have taken 2 days to decide to target, no. But in this situation and situations like this, I'm all for it as long as they follow up with the full disclosure afterwards. Max?
Yeah, I mean, as an ex, I'm going to be more sided with, having read it. I've done a lot of research into attacks on Tor, and there are lots out there. And the Tor project, I'm a massive advocate for Tor. I think it's a really good thing for human rights. But I also am never surprised that people are trying to hack it, because I know how many criminals use it, and I don't feel bad about that. I don't think it's bad to have both be for Tor and be for attacking it if you're going after bad guys with a warrant. So I don't see any problem there.
Facebook have a responsibility for its users. So there are children using Facebook, and they are being exposed to people like this to be taken advantage of. And I'm aghast, really, that Facebook didn't do more in the 2 years this guy was taking advantage of children. Like, it's disgusting that Facebook didn't do more. They should have done more. And if I have to believe that they couldn't do any more, that he was creating random account after random account after random account, and they couldn't track him, or they could see those accounts, but they couldn't. Like there's something missing in this story that they had to reach out to do to get an exploit into Tails in order to de-anonymize his IP. They should have been able to do more. And even, frankly, and I know the argument about Iranian and Chinese users trying to get on Facebook. It's Facebook. Like, it's not an essential service. So block actors coming in from anonymized services, because, frankly, it's not acceptable that Facebook's allowing that to happen to its users.
Well, I would disagree. I mean, from Facebook's perspective, the Arab Spring, Facebook was pretty influential in that. You can't block every input from the Tor project, because there is a lot of good going on there as well. So it is, but I agree. Facebook, as we've seen in the news this week, Facebook is under the, they don't check a lot of the stuff that goes on, and they've said it's not up to them to check that. But it was interesting how they did look at. They developed an algorithm specifically to find this guy, creating new accounts. So clearly they had put a lot of resources into it. But yeah, taken some time.
Does anyone believe that they had a responsibility to at least let Tails know that vulnerability existed, because Tails had no clue? That to me felt a little unnecessary. Like, there was a vulnerability in their software.
But the FBI, I think, would never. It's an ongoing operation about some lives are at risk. They have. That is not even on their roadmap of doing the responsible disclosure.
Yeah, not during and not immediately afterwards, but at some point, and I suppose that's what's happened. Like, they've come out and they've said this is exactly what we did. So I think on balance, they've got the right amount of disclosure. In this instance, I'm kind of with Paul. Like, I wouldn't have been unhappy if this report turned around and said that Facebook had installed a very specific backdoor to target this individual and others like him. He's not the only one. There's going to be more predators like him. I am all for Facebook building something that allows them to track them. The problem we have is the oversight around when they implement that, and I think that's the hard thing, and that's what we need to figure out. Well, not we, but that's what the industry needs to figure out. How do we make sure that we're using this properly? But I'm all for having that tech in place.
There was a lot of conflict amongst the interviewed. They interviewed anonymous Facebook employees and ex-Facebook employees. There was much conflict among those that they interviewed. You could see there were some that were saying this should never happen. A private enterprise should never be buying exploits from anybody. There's something wrong. And then others who were saying this was the thing that needed to be dealt with. So there aren't easy answers to those moral questions. But as stories go, that is an absolute belter.
Although I do think that we're a little bit biased. There's too many of us law enforcement mindset.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a privacy advocate.
Nobody who's, even if you're a privacy advocate, I would find it hard to believe that anybody would be ready to say, "Oh no, he should have just been left to carry on what he was doing."
Yeah, but you should see the Tails discussion they have is like, no, you should never ever touch Tor. It doesn't matter that terrible things goes on.
I've seen people on Twitter saying that they're wrong and that no circumstances should have.
Privacy is more important than everything.
The internet's a fucking horrible place. There are people who turned around and said, "Well, the parents should have been monitoring their Facebook." Yeah, exactly. It's the internet's such a horrible place sometimes.
All right, let us move on. But that was a cracker. A South African bank has had to replace 12 million, I guess, debit cards, maybe? I don't know. This is the banking division of South Africa's post office, Postbank, and they've lost more than $3.2 million from fraudulent transactions, and they will have to replace those 12 million cards for their customers. And it turns out this is because somebody printed... Is everyone paying attention? Printed the bank's master key on a piece of paper at its old data center in the city of Pretoria. The bank suspects that this might be insiders. God, I tell you what,
faxed it somewhere.
No, they have got their best guys on this, because it turns out that someone printing it inside their data center was probably an employee, and it turns out this master key is a 36-digit code, an encryption key that allows the holder to decrypt the bank's operations and access and modify banking systems. And this is, of course, where the problem came. It's also used to generate keys for the customer cards. So I just have so many questions.
It's Superman. It's the Superman film, isn't it?
Well, now you have to. I love how you always say these things, and you expect us all to go, "Oh yes, thank you, Paul, for your obscure '70s movie reference." You're gonna have to tell us the story.
Come on, I can't remember whether it's Superman 1 or 2, but it's the film where they take one little penny of all the transactions, and it gets
I do remember that actually.
Right. See, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the same story, but I just always like to shoehorn in a '70s movie reference.
So the biggest question I have is how in 2020 is there a master key? Like, that just feels so wrong. That doesn't meet any of our normal requirements for securing stuff. What has gone on?
Master keys are a perfectly valid thing. You shouldn't have one master key that controls your entire thing.
I think that's what they had here.
That's what they had there. But you have master keys, especially. So this is all around crypto. So when you generate something cryptographically, if you want to be able to repeat that, you need to seed it. And if you're familiar with RSA tokens, the little device you have gives you a digit. Same principle behind those. So those all have a seed, and that's what allows it to work. And we've seen this before. So in 2011, RSA lost their seeds, their master password.
Advanced persistent threat, don't you know?
So the same thing there. This isn't anything new. It's always going to be the way. You should have proper controls around it, and you should never use one master key for everything in your organization, but master keys are a thing.
But that's what I mean. So that makes complete sense to me, but I was expecting that they would say, oh, they got to one piece of the key, but not the whole thing. All of the operations, all of the banking systems, all of the card info. Something's wrong there, surely.
Absolutely, but there's no legislation that tells banks how they should protect that, other than the fact that obviously they should protect it. You'll see some people will have that split up, and you'll need multiple people to be able to access it.
Like in the movies when they have to put the key in at the same time and then turn.
Another 90s
3,
movies,
2,
right?
1.
Well, actually, that was in Stranger Things season 3 as well, so that's quite a modern reference.
Yeah, but Stranger Things is basically a 90s TV show.
Amazing. I might watch it again. Okay. The fact is, everything has a root key. Right, that's when you're signing with a private key. Everything's going to have it, whether it's your passport, your driving license, your credit cards. This is pretty shocking that they left this lying around on a printer.
We've seen this recently with HTTPS. So HTTPS certificates, when you get a certificate, that needs to be signed by a root authority. We've seen that those root authorities, their certificates, their master keys have expired. And that's starting to impact a lot of IoT devices because they're no longer valid. So this concept of having a master key isn't anything new to the bank. It's just making sure that you put a significant portion of your resource into protecting that and making sure that no one person can get it.
Now, this I wanted to ask about, because here's another 90s movie reference. What about Mission Impossible, that first one, where he has to break into that vault and go down on the thing and it can, like, sense his breath or something like that? Anyway, there's loads of stuff. There's loads of security. Like, imagine you had a secret special key. What is the best way to keep it safe? Because we don't usually think about security in this way. We think about layers of security for data. But in this case, we're talking about one piece of extremely sensitive data. What are the things that we can do with it in order to try to keep it safe?
It's not that simple. It depends on where you need it. If I only ever need it in special circumstances, then I hire 5 people or hire 5 people in the company and they memorize a part each.
And those guys can never go on a plane together.
Like Blowbell.
Exactly.
No,
Like
this is another story that I have, because when I used to work at a company that sold hard disk encryption, we went and met a drinks manufacturer in Scotland, very famous drinks manufacturer in Scotland, who make an orange fizzy drink that's super popular. I think it's made from Gurders. I'm not kidding you. I am not kidding you. This is absolutely true. We had quite a long conversation with them about how 2 directors of the company knew the recipe, and there were a lot of things in place to protect that recipe if the worst were to happen. And one of them was that they couldn't fly together, and the other thing that they wanted to do was to ensure that their laptops, which would also have this information on it, and visiting suppliers and stuff like that, that their laptops were also effectively protected in the event that they lost them or they went missing or whatever. But I like the idea. I think it's interesting that we like. Tech is our whole job, and the first thing Kev says is, well, if you need to put it away and never get it out again, hire 5 men.
I want to qualify that with that works if you don't ever need to use it. The problem with crypto is they're actually going to need to use it. They need to pull it out to generate the new keys.
Was there a cascade here thing, Kev, where you could have like keys signed for a specific period and they use it for the year, and then you only have to get it out once a year or so?
Yeah, certificate authorities, they have the signing ceremonies where they actually get the keys out of the safe and they go. It's like something like Out of Eyes Wide Shut or something, where they have a ceremony of
the movie's reference.
Yeah, there you go. And they make it a ceremony where they invite, like, we're going to invite this director this time, and to get the key out and then to sign a new year of certificates or whatever.
I think the thing we're missing here is that these people got this master key and then did 26,000 fraudulent transactions before anybody noticed.
You missed a better bit before. They printed it out. They didn't even write it down on a piece of paper or take a photo of it with their phone.
Well, they probably weren't allowed phones in there because of
You
security.
know, in fairness, you have to give Postbank some credit. They got a thing right that most companies have got wrong. Their printers worked.
Why is there 26,000 fraudulent transactions that nobody noticed? Go on, Kev. Tell us a boring techie thing.
So it's not a boring techie thing. It's actually a people thing. A significant portion of these cards are used for the equivalent of like a state pension. And that's why they went unnoticed for so long.
Oh, so they were like rarely used cards, so people didn't notice that they were being frauded. And I suppose if you're an employee of the bank, you would know that those were the least noticed cards to process those transactions on. It's not that clever. I mean, it's not that clever. No, but I do like it. But
you've got to imagine the
kahunas. You need kahunas.
Yeah, I know.
You need kahunas for this.
I'm trying to make a non-masculine reference. Imagine the confidence you've got to have as an insider to go, you know what? Screw my career. Screw my my liberty. I have found a vulnerability here, and I'm going to exploit it and 26,000 times later, I'm going to be a really rich person. And then, of course, Superman 2, drive to work in my Ferrari because nobody would notice.
Relatively not that much money, though. $3.2 million for 25,000 transactions.
All right, rich boy. We're not all the chief cyber sausage.
Yeah, if you're a like a boob from Sector 7G, and all you had to do was print out something on a piece of paper, and now you're on the Cayman Islands, you probably think you've done quite well out of it. I'll tell you the other thing, and let me put a £5 bet on this now. Let's revisit this story in a year, and I bet you they will not have found these people. I reckon they're gone. I reckon they're
They don't
off.
know who it is.
No, they said they
there's an
suspect.
insider that
Well, we're
printed it off.
not being told about any arrests or anything like that, are we? So we know it's happened. They think they know who it is, but I tell you, those people are long gone.
It's why they say they suspect an internal.
I still don't know which episode of the Superman. I don't know which Superman episode it is.
Are we moving on?
I think we need to move on. You love a good porn story. And the picture on this one is ridiculous.
In fairness, Max was the one who made us aware of the fappening, and so now I've kind of subtitled this next story. It's fappening all over again.
Are we going to have to mark this one as expletive?
NSFW.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if fapping is like.
Oh no!
Is it rude enough?
Please don't Google this. People.
Is it rude enough?
Please
It may not.
don't Google it.
Anyway, the root of all this is
Mum.
more insecure AWS buckets, S3 buckets. So badly configured AWS S3 bucket ends up leaking. Well, not really leaking, not even really breaching, just like people's random data. Yeah, exposing. Oh yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah,
exposing people's personals all over the internet.
45 gigabytes of people's personal data has been exposed from dating apps.
It's not data, it's just pictures. There's no PII in there.
What?
It's kind of PII.
Stop. I think Kev Breen just described a photo of a person's face as not being personally identifiable.
Maybe it's not the face.
Well, in this case, many of those gigabytes are not faces. That's pretty clear.
When we talk about PII, I will accept and concede that yes, a picture of your face is absolutely PII. But when we talk about data breaches,
and other bits.
When we talk about data breaches and mention PII, we're typically talking about usernames, like dates of birth. Like, there's none of that in here. It's just pictures.
Yeah, I don't think you've rescued that, Kev. But the most interesting part of this story is the name of these.
Yeah, the names of the same.
They're amazing.
Yeah, let's just get to it. The only reason that Paul wanted us to feature this story is so that he could now go through saying the names of the applications.
My favourite one here is like, who on earth decides that I'm really lonely. I need somebody in my life, and I'm going to choose an online dating site. I mean, I've got to do it. It's 2020 after all. There's eHarmony. There's Match. Not sure about those two. Ooh, herpes dating.
Yeah,
that's the one for me.
Yeah,
but you know what? At least you'll know you've got something in common.
Threesomes. And Gay Daddy Bear are the other two.
And
Cougary
and Sugar D.
Well, okay, but they get what you say on the they're okay. I mean, herpes dating. But the rest of the story is relatively boring because it's just an S3 bucket that nobody.
But how does this keep happening? This is not the first. This is not the first time. Certainly won't be the last. How does this keep happening?
This is why we're in business, Chris.
How is it so difficult? How is it so difficult to set up an S3 bucket properly? Kev, you have views on this, surely?
Go back. I can't remember exactly when, but go back a couple of years, and S3 were they didn't have default really restricted permissions. They now have very restricted permissions because we've seen this so often now. S3 buckets just left open to the world, and S3 now mark everything when you set it up, when you first configure it as this is not public. what that's led to is lazy developers going.
Blaming the developers.
I'm not saying every developer is lazy. I'm
that's
saying
what I heard,
that
Kevin.
in these instances, rather than trying to figure out an effective security permissions, they've just gone, allow everybody to read this.
I really think the story's a little bit more in depth than that. They've not gone, oh, I can't be asked for security. Read all. What they've done is they've obviously made a misconfiguration, or something's gone through from staging to prod, and nobody noticed. And all of a sudden, all of these like 4 or 5 dating sites are using the same. They're basically just skinned.
The same fundamental
version.
application, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's exposed its data. I mean, the actual brilliant part of this story, though, is actually that it's security researchers that found it. They did a responsible disclosure, and nobody's personal images that isn't personal data of whatever were leaked out for all the bad things that could have happened, for all the kind of sextortion.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It's brilliant, and that's why the kind of responsible ethical disclosure is such a great part of our industry today.
I still have questions. My main question actually is about how an application in an app store, in an official app store, gets checked for all kinds of stuff. Like, like what permissions is it asking for and why? Like, is it dodgy? Is it secure? Like, could it result in someone being, hacked in some way? Like, we're very interested in looking for making sure malicious stuff isn't there. And yet it seems to me like surely there must be some way of automating to see whether an S3 bucket that something connects to is secure or not. Isn't there?
Not necessarily. It depends how you've architected it. So yes, it's an S3 bucket in the back end that's storing all this data, but the app might not be requesting it directly from the S3 bucket. The app might be going to a middleware proxy and asking the proxy to send it onwards, in which case the app would only test against that proxy. You might never know there's an S3 bucket behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that I think it's. I'm not actually saying that I think it's Amazon's problem. I think they've made the configuration options available. I think it's more to do with the fact that if web applications and mobile applications are putting data in those places, I feel like someone has a responsibility somewhere, and it's not the user. Someone has a responsibility somewhere to identify that is still a thing that, although is not malicious, it still presents a risk to the user. I wonder whether we got caught up in whether things are malicious or not, when things are badly configured, that's just as bad.
This is why DevSecOps is really important as part of your software development lifecycle, because if your developers don't understand the security side of the house, they might not understand the danger of having that S3 bucket. They might not have any control over it at all. It might be your DevOps team that has created this. The developers might not be aware of how permissive those things are. So making sure that when you're building applications that touch a lot of infrastructure, is making sure your developers, your IT operations, making sure that the DevOps are talking to the security teams and the developers is key to making sure you're handling all that. And in some instances, you have to have buckets that are open. There are legitimate reasons why you would have an S3 bucket that can be read by the entire world.
But probably not full of people's naked photos.
Absolutely not, no.
But it's the whole point. Those buckets store data that needs to be accessed, so you have to access the data that's in those buckets. Like, the fact that it's read for everybody is obviously not the right design, but like that's the whole point here. Like, I
bet you the revenue generating part of those apps was set up absolutely perfectly. So it's not to do with the fact that, they don't necessarily care about their users, they don't care about security or any of that. It's just not on their radar. Like, the focus is, I'm building an app to generate revenue, and that's what I'm gonna build.
Probably on their radar now.
To their credit, they did act very quickly when they were informed to close it down. So it's not like they just ignored the report when it came in or tried to hand it off.
I mean, they didn't say
silver lining it.
They didn't pay a bug bounty, did they, Kev? I mean, they were like, Finished.
Is that what
I'm
coding?
not
is that
saying
what,
they were
is that what coding sounds like?
That's in swordfish.
Okay.
I'm not saying they were perfect, but they could have done the difficult thing and just ignored them. There's a lot they could have done. So the one tick they get is they went and fixed it very quickly.
Yeah.
And it does make the point that in the case of herpes dating, it might even reveal your health status. Thanks.
No, really?
Thanks for that.
Wow.
And the fact that you're even a member of the site was that.
That's PII.
No,
That's
it's not.
No.
I think we've definitely come to the end of our useful time. If you've enjoyed this podcast half as much as we have, please do subscribe, rate, and comment wherever you get your audio content. And if you want to know more about Immersive Labs, you can find us at immersivelabs.com or follow us on Twitter at Immersive Labs UK. Until next time, from all of us, goodbye.
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 Goodbye.